3D modeling class. It's week 13, and this week we're talking about compositing. What is compositing? Compositing is a feature in Blender, and just like in the world of creation, that involves putting things together. So this has to do with your rendering and rendering and adding effects and things like color grading and sort of like tweaking your final visuals of your render as not as part of your scene, but as a post effect. So like, some of these things, and maybe many of these things, someone might do in Photoshop or in another program. But I'll show you some of the compositing features in Blender and why it might be a useful thing. So let's go. Here we are, Blender. I just want to like set up a super basic scene real quick with something that's kind of shiny and has a couple lights, and then let's composite that. So I'm gonna delete our default cube. For some reason my microphone feels like it's weird today. Let's add a Suzanne. Shift A, add a monkey. I'm gonna go Control 3 to add a subdivision surface modifier, and actually I want to go and up the levels to 3 here for render in our subsurface modifier. I'm also going to right click and shade smooth. I am going to go to my render preview here, and I'm going to adjust my lights a little bit, but first I want to add a new light, an area light, my favorite. I'm going to G move it over here like this and S scale it up a little bit like that, maybe a little bit more. And we got to up the brightness of this because I can barely see it. So let's make this 600 watts here. And this one looks pretty good. I also want to get kind of a low angle on my render. So I'm going to kind of move my viewport to be coming up from underneath like this. And then I'm going to do Control Alt 0 to align my camera to view here. Final steps. I'm going to hit this number pad 0. And maybe just move this light. I'm going to hit G key to move this light down a little bit. And let's turn the power down on this to maybe 500 or maybe even 300. Okay. Now, let's put a material on Suzanne here. So let's go to our materials tab. New one. I'm going to make this like kind of a little like a baby blue like this. And I want to turn the roughness down just so it's looking like a little shinier like this. Yeah, almost totally shiny. Great. So then let's scale you up just a little bit so you can see a little more. Cool. Okay. Now, let's talk about this. So before we even talk about compositing, let's kind of refresh render engines a little bit. So Eevee is sort of the default engine. It doesn't use ray traced light. So a lot of the shadows and things and materials are sort of simulated or faked. In your render properties here under Eevee, there's a lot of cool things that can also be faked in addition to those shadows and stuff. So for example, like volumetrics. When we use cycles and we wanted to do volumetric lighting, you'd have to have like some volume scatter material set in the volume inside of a cube or change the world settings or stuff like that. So Eevee can fake it. Same thing with like bloom. Bloom is like glow. So if I turn on bloom here, you can see that some of my highlights just get a little bit brighter. And actually, you know what I kind of want to do is I do want to make my lights a little bit brighter. So let's up the power of this. And I also want to up the power of my this light here. And actually, I kind of want to make it a little larger too. Great. Just so we're getting like a little bit more shininess on here. So let's see. Is that doing what I want it to do? Do I want it to be brighter? Oh yeah, so here, so you can see like if I change my angle here, you can see that this, like it's really kind of glowing right here. And actually, if I change my world settings to black, you can really kind of start to see it here. So this is like, because we're using Eevee, this is like simulated. It's just sort of like finding the bright areas and making it glow. Let's just go back to my 0 here. I kind of wanted this to be like a little bit shinier here in the front. Let's maybe adjust our material a little bit. Turn up the specular. There we go. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay. What else? Or render properties here. You know, depth of well, I guess that's one that can be done anywhere. But so like bloom and ambient occlusion are sort of like the maybe the top, literally on top here, of things that Eevee fakes that Cycles you need to dig a little deeper for. So now let's switch from Eevee over to Cycles here. And let's look at how our render looks, and also look at our options here in our render properties. So you see like bloom and stuff like that is no longer available to us as just like a simple faked option. But through the power of compositing, it is. So in order to do compositing, you need to actually render. First, you need to have a render. So what I'm going to do is in my sampling here, I'm on Cycles, and actually I should switch to GPU compute because that'll be a little faster for me and it'll spare your recording. I'm going to go under sampling, under render. I'm going to change this to like 20 seconds because I don't want to wait for 4,000 samples. Okay, and I'm just going to go to my render menu and do render image. Okay, so we'll wait for this for 20 seconds. So when you're rendering an image, it is it's loading it into Blender, and it kind of saves like the most recent render. And compositing will then use this render to add effects on top of, and you'll have like an improved render. So these are like post-render effects through compositing. Okay, so we have a render. It's like our most recent render result. You don't even need to save it. I can just close it. Okay, let's go over to our compositing workspace and see what's going on here. So by default, the compositing workspace has the dope sheet down here, and I'm going to close that. So I'm just going to put this little crosshair down here on the bottom left, and hopefully it doesn't do that. It keeps dragging a new one, so I need to, there we go. Get rid of that one and get rid of that one. So we just have our compositor here. So step one, and actually maybe my face is in the way. I'll move myself over here. Step one, right above my head, right over there, use nodes. Okay. So, oh, this is gonna bug me. Okay. Similar to all the other node workspaces here in Blender, we work left to right. So on the left, we have render layers, and here on the right, we have composite. So how this works is we have a render, things happen in the middle, and then it outputs it to the composite, and then it sort of like gives us a new render. One thing that's really handy to have when you're doing compositing is actually being able to see what you're doing. So by default, so we need to add kind of another output sort of here in our compositor. So let's go Shift A, and let's add another output, and this is going to be a viewer. So composite is like, composite like is kind of the finished thing. You can see we can do file output, split viewer, but let's just do viewer like this. And we can connect the image to here. So now we can see it actually in the background. For some people, this is like a little goofy. You can adjust this in the back as a backdrop so that it's like behind you while you're doing this. And that's done with this button here. So like if you tap this backdrop, it actually like kind of removes it. what I've seen people do usually is they'll just open up a new window here. So I'm going to drag out. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, sorry. Oh gosh, I'm messing up my workspace. Okay, I got it back. So what some people do is they will have a new window here like this. And press the N key to kind of close these menus. And rather than have the compositor on this side, we can change this over to the image editor, which is here. And then since we have a viewer in our nodes here, we can change this view to, on this drop down here, we can change this view to be the viewer node. So this, now we have a little window here that'll show us whatever we've plugged into our viewer node. So here's your other keyboard shortcut. If you've got Node Wrangler on, if you hold down the Control key and drag your right mouse button, it's like a little knife, and it'll cut a node like this. And then we can just reconnect that. And then another keyboard shortcut, if you do hold down Control and Shift and click, it's going to plug something into the viewer. Whatever you click on, it's going to immediately socket it into the viewer. So that's handy, especially if we're using our viewer node as kind of a separate window here. So maybe why don't I move my camera over here? Yes, okay. Now, what do we do from here? So a really simple thing would be to like do some color correction. So we can go Shift A and we can do color and we can do RGB curves maybe. And so you can drop this on here. Obviously you can see it when I dropped this on one line, it went in between a render layer and the composite. But then we're not seeing it. So like if I adjust the levels here on RGB curves, we're not seeing it in the viewer. If I were to render this, it would show it, but don't forget you can just do Shift Control click and then that gets plugged into the viewer node as well. So any changes that we see here, so like if I turn this up, I'm making it really bright, I'm turning this down, making it really dark, etc. And we're seeing it in our viewer node as well. If you're really fancy about color correction, I'm going to delete this one here. One that other people use is color balance, I believe. Yeah, so this one has a little bit more control over the color correction. So it's like this is the low, I believe the low tones here, and this is the medium tones, and then this is the bright tones. Or maybe I have it backwards. Yes. So this is like low, medium, high. And so, you can really dial in your color correction there if you want. I heard from Blender Guru that offset power slope is a better one than lift gamma gain. So just you can take that advice if you'd like. Okay, so we're doing a little bit of color correction. Let me whoa. Now, let's talk about alpha for a little bit. So hopefully you remember that if you are wanting to render transparency here in Blender, and a lot of times you will if you're doing compositing, because like maybe you want to add a background or something like that. We need to change our render settings if you're using Cycles. So let's go back to our render settings. And we're using Cycles. And down here it's under film. And we want to do transparent. And if we check that now, I believe, and so because we're actually changing the render settings, not just our composite, our post effects, we need to re-render this so that because our render layer here isn't going to reflect the changes we make in our render settings. So we just need to do a quick F12. So I'm going to render image. We can see now that it has the checkerboard in the background, so that is indicating to us that it has transparency. And then once this is done its 20 seconds, which is the time I set it to, we can see, hopefully, a new render result. Snowplow just went by. What a cozy snowy day we have. Okay, so that's done. We have our new render result. We can close it here. Okay, so now we are seeing on our thingamabob here, we have our new rendered layer, and our viewer now is showing transparency in the background. Okay, so now if we wanted to add like a complementary background color to this, we can do that here in compositing rather than doing it in your scene. So first, we just need a new input here. And so let's do Shift A and input, and we just need RGB. So like we're inputting a color into the background here. So that's, you kind of have to think of it as like input. So it's like source data. And now you can see that it took a couple of clicks for this to update, I guess. And let's just pick a complementary color to go. Oh, and we can adjust it later. Now we need to combine this color with our rendered layer. So our rendered layer has alpha, and we want this to be in the background. So the node that we need to use to combine stuff, and I think we used it maybe previously. But it's in color, and it's called alpha over. So this is basically like take the alpha of something, or like take something and put it over another thing and also use alpha. The name doesn't necessarily make sense to me. So and here's an example too of that keyboard shortcut. So like RGB. If I just do Control Shift and I click this, it's just going to connect. You can see that it like went way behind all this other stuff and plug that into our viewer. So now I'm just seeing that blue color. Well, let's make it a little brighter. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Control Shift click on color balance there. So we need to alpha over. So let's working right to left. We'll actually we'll leave our color balance in for now just for fun. So we need to plug the image into this image here, and we also need to plug this image into this image here, and we need a factor here, a factor level, and so this is maybe why it's called alpha over, because we need the alpha data from our rendered image to plug into the factor here. Now I believe I have and then we need to obviously plug the alpha over image into our color balance here, so it continues down the line. So you can see that I've actually done this backwards. We have the right alpha here, but I plugged we're using the blue on top of the monkey rather than underneath the monkey. So I just need to flip these around here, and now we have, and hopefully this kind of makes sense. The image on the bottom is being alphaed over the one on the top. So we have our blue background behind our Suzanne. Whew, okay. And we're also doing our color correction and stuff like that. So why would you do this? Why would this be a thing? So if you were remember that if you have an environment texture, an environment color, that is casting light onto your scene, onto your models. So like we had a black world color when we rendered, and so like this is like a pretty black dark area here. If we had made it blue like this, if we'd made our world texture, environment texture blue, it would be casting blue on it. Or like if we wanted this to be pink, everything would have like a pink sheen on it. And maybe you don't want that, or maybe you do. So it's like these are all just kind of like stylistic choices that you can make. But the nice thing about compositing is you have the option to just change it, just like this. All right, what's next? So yeah, like alpha over is the thing you use to combine stuff, and just also a reminder, let me go back to this. Control Shift click will plug it into your viewer here. So I just Control Shift clicked just the alpha over before the color balance, so this would be like before the color balance, after the color balance, before, after. So, So let's talk about the glow, because that was one of the things that I think were missing from what we were doing in Eevee. So what is a glow? How does that even work? So what we want is, so a glow is just like blurry light, basically. That's kind of how you need to think of it in this case. Glow is like light areas of this that are blurry. So what we want is just we want an image of just the highlights, and we want to make just that part blurry. So how do we get that? In Blender and in 3D rendering, there are things called passes, and it's different types of renders that generate different types of data. So for example, let's go to output properties here. Actually, no, passes. View layer properties. You maybe have not ventured here before. So a pass is, and I think I just said this, a pass is like one type of render. So right now, if you look at what is being rendered here, we have combined. So when you render something, it's combining all of the information, all of the data for your scene together. If you check any of these boxes, it's going to also render that thing. So data. So this is, these are like things, I guess the data is less useful in this case. But light, this is a good one. So we want to render maybe direct glossy light. So let's click this and see what happens. So you can see when I click this, it's another node pops up on our render layer here, or another socket pops up on our render layer node. So if you check all of these, it's good. These are all different passes. So like just looking at glossy, for example, this is going to show us the direct light that is shiny on a thing. Indirect light would be like something that's bounced off, or this is like the color of the glossiness. So we want direct light, and it'll maybe make more sense once we do it. So again, once we've changed the render settings. If I wanted to plug this glossy right into the image, it's not going to show us anything because we haven't rendered it yet. So let me just do this again. So let's do another render image. And so this is going to do two passes now. It does the combined pass, and it does the glossy direct light pass. So we shall wait another 10 seconds while this finishes. I maybe could have changed it to 10 seconds, but I just wanted a little bit extra detail. In addition, now it will be doing the glossy direct light pass. So okay, there we go. I think it's done. Okay, let's close this. So now let's take glossy direct and plug that into our viewer and see what it gets. Aha. So very interesting. So this is what the glossy direct light looks like. So now how do we use this? How do we make this our glow? Okay, so first let's put in a blur node, because remember we said glow is just like blurry light. So over here, I'm going to Shift A, and I want to add, and I don't even know exactly where it is. I'm just going to search for it, blur. Regular old blur. And we want to take our glossy direct pass, plug that into the blur, and let's plug, or I could have just Control Shift clicked. And let's just see what this looks like. Let's turn up the blur a little bit. So you can have, 39 and I don't know, 10 or something like this. Actually, I think fast Gaussian blur works a little bit better, because I think, and if you do a relative like this, yeah. So you can change, whoa. Undo. Where are we going? So the reason to use a relative, so this is like a pixel count If you use a relative, it's like relative based on the size of your render. So if your render size were to change, you would want it to be relative, or you'd have to go back and change the number of pixels that it's blurring. So, okay, so I'm putting a blur on this. Let's just do 1% in each the X and Y direction. Does size do anything? It does, but we'll just keep it at 1. That works for me. So this like looks sufficiently blurry to me, but let's put this on top of our let's put this into line here. So first I need to decide where I want this to be. If it's going to be before the color correction or after the color balance. Let's put it here, and then we can color balance afterwards. So this one, because, and you need to know a little bit about blending modes. So if you've used Photoshop or whatever, even After Effects has this. But if something is black, or if you want to like remove the thing that's black, there's a couple ways that you can do it. Sorry, when you're putting something together and you're wanting to remove black, there's a couple ways that you can do it. You can either screen or you can add. So let's, I believe add works better. So if I go, we can do, I think if you just search add like this, oh no, blend. Oops. No, how do I do this? Oh, sorry, it's just called mix. And then we select add out of here. So, okay. So I'm putting this in between here. Whoops. And rather than mix, I want to change this to add. So here in mix, these mix modes or blending modes, or whatever. So let's try screen just for fun. If I plug in this image here, and I plug this image here, and I plug this image here. Now let's try add. Yeah, okay. So screen wasn't quite working because it was showing me this like these little black bits here. I think whether that was like overexposed. So I think add is the better choice here, because add is, it just takes the light parts and increases the lightness of what's under it for add. And here we can change. I believe we can just change. Oh no, but that's actually, we do want 1 for that. Anyway, there we go. So you can see now that we have a little bit of glowing happening. So let's move this over and blow this up a little bit. Very nice. And like you can change we can just adjust this right on the fly here. So we can make and again, this is a percentage, so like it's going to be really tricky. Maybe you don't want to do relative. Maybe you do want to do just like a pixel size. So like it's blurring just in the X. So it's sort of like kind of a sparkle star thing that's happening. Or maybe it's a little bit wider in the Y, because it's like a kind of a cinematic thing. You know what I learned? I don't know if any of you watched that thing that Andrew Price did about Toy Story 4. And I actually didn't know this about cinema cameras, but that like a lot of times in movies, the reason why like far away lights are kind of blurred vertically is because they shoot cameras in like double the resolution wide and then squish it down like this. So the blurriness of the light is wider than it typically is, and then they squish it down just in the vertical, which doesn't like make sense, but it was an interesting fact. Anyway, I actually just kind of liked how this was before. If it was 1% X, 1% Y with the fast Gaussian blur. Cool. So let's talk about what's happening here. We have our rendered layer, which has the alpha on it. We're putting a color in the background here. Maybe let's even make it a green like this. No. You can use a color picker to pick a color from your scene, maybe. It's just a nice little blue. We are using the alpha over node to alpha the Suzanne over the RGB background. At the same time, we're also taking the glossy direct pass and plugging that into a blur. So it's making it look like blurry light, which is glow, and adding that over the combined background in Suzanne. Then we're doing a little bit of color correction, changing this just a tiny bit, and then we're outputting this to our viewer and the final composite render. So, okay, that's not bad. So just for fun, I'm going to turn on like a bunch of these things, all these data ones. Z, mist, vector, normal, you know, all that stuff. And let me just want to plop these out real quick and see, just show you what they look like and identify possible uses for them. I know that like Z and mist kind of will shade things based on their like position or distance from the camera. And like the normal too will be like, we'll show you kind of where the like different sides of things are. So I don't know if you remember like a normal map that we've seen downloaded from Polyhaven or whatever, but it's like purples and yellows and stuff, but it basically like signals what side gets shaded and what side has light on it. Okay, so here's our rendered image. So remember, we had to re-render because it's new render settings. So I can close this. And now you can see I've got a bunch of these new inputs here on the compositor. And we can just control shift click and cycle through all these. So there's the alpha. Or no, that was the image. This is the alpha. This is the depth. And actually, maybe it's kind of hard to see here, but like I can see the outline of the monkey here, and depth is Z. So this is showing like the Z position of things. So if you had multiple objects in your scene, things that were closer, I believe, would be darker. Or maybe I should experiment with this. But like the distance will show like darker or lighter. And so I think because there's just the one Suzanne in here, it's just showing, you can barely see the outline of it here. Let's go down this mist. So this again like shows relative distance to the camera. So like things that are farther away are a little mistier. So you can actually kind of see, that's kind of a cool effect. You can see like the outlines of things and the kind of the shape of the eyebrow ahead of the back of the head. Anyway, position. I don't know what this is signaling, but it's different colors. Normal, here's the normal. So again, so yeah, this is like a signal of like different sides of things, like signaling what's front and back. So like the yellows are kind of on this side and the reds are on this side and the purples are on this side, I think. Vector, that's empty. UV, oh yeah, so these are the different parts of the UV map. The glossy direct, oops, I'm pressing the wrong keyboard shortcut. Glossy direct, we already saw that one. Noise. So this kind of showed where the noise was before it denoised. Denoising normal. Denoising albedo. Denoising depth. So yeah, I honestly don't know what some of these are for, but these are different like data passes that you can use with compositing. I'll turn all those off because we don't really need them. But yeah, so here's, and so now I should switch our viewer back to the color balance here. So there's our nice glowy render. If you, and like there's other things that you can do. So you can do stuff with volume, and so like the light basically. You can just do stuff with like diffuse light, indirect light, light that's hitting volume that you might have. So it's kind of cool. Shadows, yeah, ambient occlusion. This is another thing we could do too. Remember, ambient occlusion is like faces of things that are closer together will appear darker with ambient occlusion. Okay, let's just do the ambient occlusion pass real fast. Let's see what that shows us. Do a quick render, and I will kill 20 more seconds while we wait for this. No, I'll just pause. Oh shoot! And you know, I have no idea how long I was recording. So hold on. Okay, so forgive me because I realized I was like talking and I had my recording paused. So this is what the ambient occlusion pass looks like. So ambient occlusion, it has to do with the amount of ambient light that reaches kind of small spaces. So like here in the mouth, because like the mouth is inset on the model, it's it's being occluded a little bit, and there's less ambient light to bounce around in it. So it just kind of makes this a little bit darker, and it's a little bit more of a natural look. Same thing here, like with the like kind of around the eye. There's less opportunity for light to bounce around in there because it's kind of a little crevice. So it's occluding some of the light, and like it's a very small distinction, but if you've got an eye for it, it'll make your lighting and shadows look a lot more realistic. Because like if you had just like a light over here, you'd see a shadow from the light, but it would just be like a pretty straight normal shadow. Whereas this like occlusion is just like a little gentler and nicer shadow. So let's talk about how we'd actually use this. This will maybe be our last example. Okay, so we've got our AO here. We need another mix because we want to kind of mix this on top of our thingamabob here. So let's do Shift A. We will need a mix. Oops, not a distance key. No, thank you. Shift A, mix. Okay, and we want to, and again, we need to decide where we want this to go. We probably don't want to include the blur as we're mixing this together. So I'm going to mix this before we combine the blur. So I'm just going to kind of move these over a little bit. This is where being organized with your nodes is a good skill. So I'm going to take our alpha over and plug that into this first image here. Whoops, I'm going to just disconnect that and plug that in there. And I also want to take our ambient occlusion and put that in here. And rather than mix, this one is going to be multiply. So we want to multiply these together, and then now we're going to stick this image, add the blur, and that goes in there like that. Okay. So by default, our multiply is not going to be great. So we need to just turn this down because it like took out the whole blue background a little bit. So we just need to like turn the factor down on this. Yeah, okay. So actually, let's see how it's doing, how we're feeling about it. It's looking pretty good. So like if I do Control Shift click here, so we're just seeing the multiply versus the alpha over, you can kind of see it's like very subtle, but like look right here in the mouth. So this is before and after. So you can see that it is getting a little bit darker in there. We can probably also factor in the alpha to this too, like that. There we go. So that'll make it even more apparent. So here's what I did. I took the alpha from the rendered layers and plugged it into the factor of this multiply, and so that stopped it from affecting the background as well. So here's before and after. Same thing here. Like I could even see in this area that the shadows got a little bit nicer. So here's before and after. Before and after. Yeah. It's looking pretty good. Okay. So I apologize if like the recording, if I didn't quite make sense, because this happens to me sometimes, and it's like my recording is paused and I have no idea how long I was talking before. But let me just briefly talk about what I went through. So all of these things, like you can experiment with these, like just check all these boxes and render it, and you'll have all of these outputs, and you can just stick them in the viewer and kind of see what they do. So like Z and mist are sort of like relative distance to the camera. So like I think it works better with multiple objects. So if you have something that's really close to the camera and something that's really far, the thing that's close will be like black, and the thing that's far will be like gray or white. And things like that. So just sort of interesting ways to kind of manipulate your image after the fact. So this is compositing. It's like post render effects, and like so. And like I said before, some of these examples, like adding in a background, like that can be done in scene, or like changing the colors of things. Maybe you just try to get the colors right before you render, rather than trying to do these color correction things after the fact. Maybe it makes more sense to organize it like this. I'm not the best node organizer. You maybe are better than I, but you'll come up with a method that works for you. So just looking at this again real quick. So we've got our rendered layer. We've got our blue background. First, we're combining the blue background with a rendered layer using the alpha over. Then I am adding in the ambient occlusion. So I'm multiplying the ambient occlusion onto our combined background and Suzanne. Then I'm taking the glossy direct light pass, blurring it, and doing a add mix on top of that. Then we've got a little color correction, and then we output that to the regular composite. So now if we do a final render, this will put everything together, and then we'll save this image. So that's compositing. I just want to wait for this to finish. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And then it takes a few more seconds just to do the final little compositing. Great. It's a shiny monkey on a blue background with really nice detailed shadows. Super cool. Okay. Well, hey, next week is Thanksgiving, the week of Thanksgiving. So you will not have an assignment or a lecture next week. Let's pull up the class schedule real fast. Okay. You have just watched the lecture on compositing. Assignment 3 is due. No class. Next week, it's a workshop day. In 2 weeks, we will not Zoom. I will be out of town. I'll be working. We'll look at other software next week, just at a very high level. And then we're rolling into your final project. So your final project is due before class on December 12th. So hopefully you've at least got a good idea of what you're doing, and maybe you've already started putting pen to paper and done a little bit of modeling, blocking things out, seeing what works, what doesn't work. Please, since we are not going to be speaking in a Zoom, in an organized Zoom before the end of the semester, if you have questions and you would like to meet with me, I'm happy to accommodate. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Happy modeling. Have a great Thanksgiving. Take a little time off if you need it. Everybody needs it. Take a little time off. And we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.